Wow, Vivek and Elon just put out new information on the plans that they have to lay off thousands, tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of government workers. In an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal and through other interviews, we get a bigger picture of just how many people might be getting axed and what's going to happen to them. Let's talk about that and some of the reactions that we're seeing so far, especially from the left. Take a look at this. Elizabeth Warren on the left. Donald Trump picked an unqualified billionaire wrestling mogul to lead the Department of Education. This is an insult to our teachers and every kid in America who relies on a good public school education. I always think it's really interesting just seeing sort of the freak out when there are appointments from the other side. And this is because Linda was appointed to be the Secretary of Education. And you're seeing the same kind of freak out with DOGE. Take a look at this. Crystal ball. Elon Musk plans to destroy as much of the government as possible because he recognizes it as the only force capable of limiting his labor abuses. Ouch! Now saying the people who work for Tesla and SpaceX are abused? Environmental destruction. Oh no, SpaceX ejects clean potable water to cool its spacecraft when they take off and land. And that's now causing environmental destruction. Tax dollar plunder and limitless robber baron domination. What? The weaker the elected government, the stronger the plutocrats. Basically, she's trying to say, like, hey, if you get the government out of the way, they won't come after the Trumps and the Elons anymore, which, frankly, she's probably somewhat right here. Elon does not like the SEC, and I have a feeling this can be like the first agency he wants to take a giant axe to. But remember, Elon's not in government. He's just advising Trump. We'll talk about that here. Trump aides are irritated. Elon seems to think he is the co-president, but in truth, I think he believes he is vastly more powerful than Trump. Yeah, I mean, she's probably right about that. But clearly, she's a little bit upset. So why are they so upset? Well, maybe it's because now Elon Musk is on the cover of Time. Electric vehicles, become the richest man, buy Twitter, launch Rocket, bring Rocket back, implant human brain chip, get Trump elected, work from Mar-a-Lago, next, slash 2 trillion, next, fly to Mars. I mean, it's kind of a cool resume. You got to give him that. But all right, let's understand from here, what plans are we seeing from Vivek and Elon? Well, a great way to start is an op-ed from none other than Vivek and Elon. Yes, they actually have an opinion editorial piece in the Wall Street Journal, and we're going to be able to go through and see what their argument is. The DOGE plan to reform government following the Supreme Court's guidance will reverse decades-long executive power grabs. All right. I like the picture, by the way. You got sort of maybe like what almost looked like an Elon Vivek. Not really, but kind of trying to rein in the government here. All right, so what do we got here? Our nation was founded on the basic idea that the people we elect to run the government. But this isn't how America functions today. Most legal edicts aren't laws enacted by Congress, but rather rules and regulations that are promulgated by unelected bureaucrats, tens of thousands of them. Yeah, this is going to be, it's not just the SEC, but it's in part a reference to the SEC. The way you have to think about this is, government innovates way slower than the public markets do, or the private sector does. And Congress is way slower than even government agencies. So what happens is when there's new technology or new innovation or a new way of doing business or just a new something, what ends up happening is agencies try to come up with rules to help that new something function. So it's not like Congress is like, here are the rules for full self-driving. Instead, you've got NHTSA and others that are like, okay, let's maybe do something like this because Congress put us in power to come up with the best solution when and if somebody ever wants to have a robotaxi. This basically make sure that at least there is a way to try to balance safety and innovation without every single time having to go to Congress, which is very, very slow, and often things get held hostage in Congress. That's the intention. But, good intentions can obviously get burdened and become problems. And that's basically what Vivek is saying here, is that, hey, all these regulations, they just end up causing problems, they're expensive, and they just burden the private sector. Why don't you let the private sector regulate itself? And that's obviously where you go, okay, well, can the private sector regulate itself? Well, it depends. Are you a full libertarian? Then the answer is yes. Are you somebody who thinks there should be some balance of government? Well, then you need government agencies. But anyway, Vivek basically says, hey, these bureaucrats think they're immune from getting fired, and let us tell you, they are not. That is anti-democratic, because we should be able to elect our leaders who make these decisions, not, all these appointed sort of rule-making body folks in their committees who are making all the rules. Vivek is taking a very sort of populist approach, like bring the power back to the people. There's obviously always a counter-argument, but he says that this power grab by agencies is an existential threat to our republic. He says, we won't just write reports or cut ribbons, unlike government commissions or advisory committees. We won't just write reports or cut ribbons, we'll cut costs. Which is actually kind of a little bit ironic, because technically DOGE is just an advisory committee from outside the government. And then he even goes on to say that here. I'm pretty sure Vivek wrote this, and Elon just sort of read it and signed off on it. It sounds very Vivek-ish. But anyway, it says, the two of us will advise DOGE at every step to pursue three major kinds of reform: regulatory rescissions, administrative reductions, and cost savings. I mean, all that sounds great, obviously until it creates problems. But anyway, and look, I'm all for more efficiency. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to take a side here, but I do think it's funny when they say we're not just going to be an advisory committee, and technically they're an advisory committee, and then they even say, the two of us will advise DOGE at every step of the way. Yes, you will. And DOGE will advise the president. So the big legal precedent that Vivek and Elon really want to milk here is the overturning of the Chevron doctrine. This is a pretty big one, because usually federal courts, when problems would come up, they would just say, all right, like, what did the agency say about this? I'm going to make up an example. Let's say you're FINRA, or you know what, let's do an easier one that's maybe more relatable. Let's say you're the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and everyone wants to build ADUs and rent them out separately. And a HUD comes in and says, no, we will not allow that for reason XYZ. Well, it used to be that federal courts would, in lawsuits, when somebody goes, this isn't fair, I should be able to build an accessory dwelling unit. It used to be that a federal court would say, well, I mean, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, they get priority over you, so we're just going to stick with them. The Chevron doctrine balances this back out again, which is probably a good thing, because you want courts to be able to provide balance here and not just bias to regulatory bodies. So this is a good thing. And they want to weaponize it to basically fight agencies in court, because what'll happen is you'll use executive orders to try to limit the reach of certain agencies or eliminate certain rules. Those agencies are going to sue you, and then you're going to use the Chevron doctrine as a precedent defense to try to say why the agency is not always right, and we have to actually balance the removal of potential executive action, which is then benefited by these two cases right here: Franklin versus Massachusetts and Collins versus Yellen. I put a little summary of those. Collins versus Yellen gives the president the authority to control the executive, and that can't be impeded. So if Trump is signing executive orders that are drafted by DOGE, it's really hard to overturn those. It actually kind of flips the balance of power from the agencies to the president, especially in coordination with the Chevron doctrine, which used to flip it in favor of the agencies. So think about that for a moment. If my right hand is the agency, my left hand is Trump. It used to be that presidents just really wouldn't do anything, and agencies were elevated. So when somebody sued an agency, the agency basically had priority. Like a person or a business would be like, here. So the agency always won. Chevron does this. Whoop. It sort of brings the businesses and people more equal with the agencies. And then if you add to this Collins versus Yellen and Franklin versus Mass, and a president who actually wants to do something, which we think Trump wants to do with executive action, and I think he's going to get pressure to do it by Elon and Vivek, and he might. How much he will, we don't know. But now what you do is you have a president that actually has more power than the executive agencies, which is the intention after all anyway. But if he's willing to do stuff by executive action, he could slam dunk a lot of agencies. So Trump's got a lot of real power here. And if he follows the recommendations of DOGE, yes, they can actually practically effectuate massive layoffs at the federal government. They can pull this off. They've got the legal backing to do this. And we know Trump is not opposed to a fight in court. So I wrote here, they think Trump will sign off on whatever they say. He might. Well, that's kind of why Elon's been hanging around so much. They talk about drastic reductions in federal regulations, massive headcount reductions across federal bureaucracy. This, by the way, is potentially recession-inducing in the short term, but in the long term, yes, it does create more efficiency because people will then have to enter the free market and find jobs. But this is also problematic. The reason I find this problematic is I sent this tweet out, and I just want you to think about it as well, okay? So just think about this for a moment, okay? DOGE, we're going to fire federal government workers. Vivek, DOGE's goal is to help support their transition into the private sector. The private sector. In other words, like, people are going to go, man, does the private sector really want the government workers? You know, that's going to be something else to consider here. It's not going to be that straightforward to just say, everything's going to be Gucci Doochies, right? It's kind of hard to do these sort of transitions here, but whatever. President can use existing laws to give them incentives for early retirement, make voluntary severance payments. This will help us govern competitive service. We're going to require federal employees to come to the office 5 days a week, which would result in a wave of voluntary terminations that we welcome. Maybe, John Thune was arguing that about only 6% of government workers actually come into the office all the time. The way he's phrased that sort of implies that in order to qualify for that, you have to basically be in the office 100% of the time. And let's be real, even in the private sector, most people don't come in 100% of the time. Even though they might come in 90% of the time, technically you'd be part of that bundle of people who don't come in all the time. So think John Thune, the new Senate Majority Leader, who's taking over from McConnell, is like kind of being a little extreme with that comparison. But then there's also bias from OPM, which is the Office of Personnel Management or the Office of Management and Budget Review. They say that 80% of federal work hours are currently spent in person. So there's a little bit of a debate in terms of what's going on here. Ramaswamy expects massive reductions, and of course the president of the largest federal employee union says that, hey, this isn't backed up by the data. This isn't fair. So you're really, you're kind of doing what they want, which is you're starting to piss people off in government, and honestly, a lot of people are all for that. I'm all for more government efficiency too. They also talk here about how, some people say that, once money is authorized by Congress, somebody can't stop it, like a president can't stop it via the 1974 Impoundment Control Act. But then they counter that and argue unless Trump says that's unconstitutional, in which case, basically sue him. And there will be endless lawsuits. Oh, trust me, it's going to be extremely entertaining. And the courts are going to have their hands full on this one, probably more so than the courts are busy with immigration cases. They're going to have more lawsuits against Trump, I feel like. But anyway, Pentagon recently failed its 7th consecutive audit is another thing that Ramaswamy says here. Now, it's worth noting, look, I covered this, and I want you to have the logic of this, okay? This is a game of 4D chess, what they're doing by mentioning this government audit thing. And it's actually brilliant, okay? You got to give it to them. But it's also not entirely fair. So the Pentagon didn't get audited until 2018. Okay, that's a big problem in itself. Like, why the HE double hockey sticks was our Pentagon not audited until 2018 and the Department of Defense? I don't know. But we started doing audits in 2018. And we went from like a success ratio of our audit at like 16%, like, no comments, no review issues, to compliance at about 55%. So we're a little more than half compliant now with our DOJ audits for the Pentagon and whatever. Or sorry, not DOJ, Department of Defense, DOD. So like, you're making really good progress. Yes, they're still technically failing. Understandable. That's a great headline. But you're not failing on the full $800 billion. You are failing on a chunk of things. And so Don Jr. is right when he talks about the soap dispensers that Boeing overcharged, or, you know, as we used to say, like the, what was the old joke? The $100 hammer, right? These things are happening. This is true. Boeing allegedly ripped off the government by overcharging almost 8,000% for soap dispensers. Yet Boeing is not in trouble for money laundering, right? Yes. So there are reports that come out that do say, hey, like, we may be getting ripped off. Like, here's a October 25th audit of C-17 spare parts. And if you go through this, you could find, okay, yeah, looks like for dispensers, we got overcharged. Take a look at this. We initiated an audit in response to the allegation the DOD hotline concerning spare parts pricing. The allegation stated that Boeing overcharged the Air Force for lav soap dispensers on a C-17. And then, of course, you know, they go into trying to figure this out. So, like, don't get me wrong. The government does make oopsie-doopsies. But this idea that the government is entirely failing its audits at the DOD isn't entirely true. And what's fascinating is they actually expect that by 2028, they'll be 100% compliant. Which the hilarious thing about that is that'll still be under Trump. So the impression that people are giving in social media now is, before Trump, the government's failing all of its audits. Well, if they actually meet the 100%, which they expect, they're already expecting this before Trump, if they meet the 100% by 2028 under Trump, Trump will go, I took them from 100% failure to 100% success. That's not true, but that's how it's going to get taken away. Like, that'll be the big takeaway. And it's brilliant. It's like 4D chess. It's kind of like what I joked 4 years or actually even more ago. I'm like, how funny would it be if Donald Trump loses to Biden, all the inflation happens under Biden's administration, then there's no inflation under Trump, and Trump comes back for a second term with no inflation. Everybody will just blame Biden for all the inflation. And fate loves irony. It's so entertaining. Anyway, yes, soap dispensers, 80x markup in the finding. Kind of crazy, huh? It's also kind of crazy to look at some of these things. See, look at this is how they kind of break this up. The Air Force paid fair and reasonable prices for 9 spare parts. We could not determine whether they paid fair and reasonable prices for 25 parts. The Air Force did not pay fair and reasonable prices for 12 spare parts. I kind of think that's entertaining, just how, like, why is this done after the fact? Look at this. The Air Force did not pay reasonable prices for 12 of 46 or 26% of the C-17 parts we reviewed, okay? For the purpose of our analysis, if a price was 25% or more, we considered it unreasonable, okay? So you could do a 24% markup and get away with it. And that would be considered reasonable. Got it. All right. So more than 80 here we go. More than 80 times the commercially available cost for soap dispensers led to the Air Force overpaying by $149,000 for soap dispensers. The right shows the typical countermount, and the left shows what the DO or you know whatever what the government actually, the Air Force actually paid for. So let's see here. Yeah, and they actually go into like little pieces of various different commercially similar pressure transmitters. I mean, at least it's being done, you know? But it is certainly entertaining. It's a much better headline to go, oh, 8,000% overcharge than it is to say they overpaid by $149,000. Like that's bad. But it doesn't sound as bad as 800%, that's for sure. Just because the government's budget is so large. And I'm not saying we shouldn't be accounting for that or dealing with it. But what I'd like to do now is play a clip that's going viral. And it has to do with Milton Friedman. It's been really entertaining. It's his blueprint for getting rid of government agencies. 14. And it's really entertaining, and it's worth listening to. So let's get into it.
14 is a lot for television, so I want to just go right down the list quickly and have you give me a thumbs up or thumbs down. Keep them, or abolish them. Department of Agriculture.
Abolish.
Gone. Department of Commerce.
Abolish.
Gone. Department of Defense.
Keep.
Keep it. Department of Education.
Abolish.
Gone. Energy.
Abolish.
Housing.
Accepted.
Which, remember, the Department of Education getting abolished is an idea of DOGE and Elon and Vivek and Trump.
Energy ties in with the military.
Well, then we shove it under defense.
That's
the little
right.
bit that handles the nuclear,
Right, that ought to go under
plutonium and
defense.
so forth goes under defense, but we abolish the rest of it. Health and Human Services?
There is room for some public health activities to prevent contagion. Such a thing as, for example,
So you'd keep the National Institutes of Health, say, and the Center for Disease Control down in
not the
Atlanta?
National Institute.
Oh, no?
No, those are mostly a research agency. No, that's a question of whether the government should be involved.
That's also a very good point. There's like, should the government be funding research, or should that just be the private market?
In financing research.
And the answer is no.
Well, that's a very complicated issue, and it's not an easy answer with respect to that.
We'll eliminate half of the Department of Health
Yeah,
and Human
something
Services?
like that.
Okay, one half. There we go. Housing and Urban Development?
Out.
Oh, didn't even pause over that one. Department of the Interior?
Oh, well, but housing and urban development has done an enormous amount of harm. My God. If you think of the way in which they've destroyed parts of cities under the rubric of eliminating slums.
Jack Kemp
You
is-
know,
Go ahead.
you remember that Martin Anderson wrote a book on the federal bulldozer describing the effect of the urban development. There have been many more dwelling units torn down in the name of public housing that have been built.
Jack Kemp has proposed
This is basically the idea that when the government gets involved in housing, it's so inefficient that they will actually demolish old apartment buildings that are ugly and deemed, uninhabitable, which may be true. But then they say they're going to replace them with new, but then you get caught up in so many environmental regulations or just zoning or whatever, or parking issues or whatever, that you just don't end up building at all. And so now you're net negative.
selling to the current inhabitants of public housing their unit, their townhouse, their apartment for $1 a piece, and just shifting the ownership to the people who live.
If you got rid of the Department of Housing and Urban Development, it would be worth doing that.
All right, done. That's gone. Department of the Interior, your beloved National Park Service.
Well, given that the problem there is, you first have to sell off all the land that the government owns. But that's what you should do.
But it could be done pretty quickly.
It could be done. You should do
auctions.
that. There's no reason for
All right.
government to own. The government now owns something like 1/3 of all the land in the country.
And that's too much. Should go down to zero.
Should go down to, well, not entirely zero. They ought to own the land on which government buildings are.
Okay, terrific. Department of Justice.
Now, he's laughing, but honestly, Milton Friedman sounds really reasonable here. And I think the reporter's kind of like, you're a clown, you're a loony. I kind of like him.
Justice.
Oh, yes.
Keep that one.
Keep that one.
Labor.
No.
Gone. State.
Keep.
Keep it. Transportation.
Gone.
Gone. The Treasury.
You have to keep it to collect taxes.
All right. Collect taxes through the Treasury. Veterans Affairs.
You can regard the veteran affairs as a way of paying essentially salaries for services of those who have been in the armed force. But you ought to be able to get rid of it.
You should be able to
by
pay it off.
Pay it off.
Pay off lump sums, perhaps.
That's right.
And just get rid of it. Okay, Milton Friedman, if you are made dictator for one day, the next day the American government...
No, I don't want to be made dictator.
You wouldn't?
I don't believe in dictators.
Okay.
I believe we want to bring about change by the agreement
I love this.
of the citizens. I don't believe in arbitrary rule.
Let me put it this way then.
If we can't persuade the public that it's desirable to do these things, we have no right to impose them, even if we had the power to do it.
All right.
Nice.
From 14
And that's obviously where people today are like, Trump has a mandate.
departments down to
To
four,
its
four and a
basic
half.
fundamental
4.5.
functions. What are its fundamental functions? Preserve the peace, defend the country,
All right.
provide a mechanism whereby individuals can adjudicate their disputes. That's the Justice
Department.
Protect individuals from being coerced by other individuals. The police function.
Right.
And now, this is both the central government and the state and local governments. The police function is primarily local and central.
Right.
And those are the fundamental functions of government, in my opinion.
Milton Friedman, thank you very much.
That was amazing. Absolutely amazing. So there you go. Full details and plan on DOGE, the Department of Governmental Efficiency. And if you want an efficient alpha report totally for free every day when the market opens, about 15 minutes before, text it and email to you. Go to meetkevin.com/alpha. Get your alpha report and get your trade ideas, options volatility, catalysts to pay attention to, news to pay attention to, everything related to the market and making money, as well as some quotes from me. Check it out by going to meetkevin.com/alpha. It's free. Thanks. Bye.
Why not advertise these things that you told us here? I feel like nobody else knows about this.
We'll try a little advertising and see how it goes.
Congratulations, man. You have done so much. People love you. People look up to you.
Kevin Paffrath there, financial analyst and YouTuber. Meet Kevin. Always great to get your take.